Imagine you're standing in a dimly lit room in Washington, D.C. in the year 1801. On the table is a map of North America. To your eyes, everything west of the Mississippi River is a vast, foggy terra incognita, an unknown land. You've been told it's a wilderness, a silent void waiting for a civilized footprint. But here is the terrifying reality. That map is a lie. That blank canvas was actually a screaming, vibrant, and crowded mosaic. If you had the true map of the time, you wouldn't see empty space. You would see hundreds of sovereign nations, ancient trade routes, older than Rome, Spanish fortresses, and French shadow empires. The story of the American West doesn't begin with a wagon train. It begins with one of the most audacious, legally questionable, and high-stakes real estate scams in human history. This is the moment America decided to buy a backyard it had never even seen, with people living in it who didn't even know they were being sold. The philosophy of arrogance, manifest destiny before the first bullet was fired. The conquest was won in the mind. The leaders of the young United States weren't just looking for land. They were looking for a divine excuse. They called it manifest destiny. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a radical, almost fanatical belief that the United States had a God-given right and an obligation to spread its institutions from the Atlantic to the Pacific, to the politicians in D.C. The fact that millions of indigenous people had lived there for 10,000 years was a mere inconvenience to God's plan. They viewed the continent not as a home for others, but as an inheritance for themselves. But there was a massive, glaring problem. In 1800, the United States was a coastal weak. It ended at the Mississippi River. To the west lay the massive Louisiana Territory, controlled by the world's most dangerous man, Napoleon Bonaparte. The Napoleonic fire sale the year is 1803. Napoleon is preparing to engulf Europe in flames. He needs money faster. He also has a problem in the Caribbean. A slave revolt in Haiti has decimated his army, and he realizes that defending a massive territory in North America is a logistical nightmare. Enter Thomas Jefferson's envoys. They went to Paris with a modest goal: buy the city of New Orleans for $10 million so American farmers could ship their crops. Instead, Napoleon's minister leaned over the table and asked a question that would change the world forever. What would you give for the whole of Louisiana? The Americans were stunned. They didn't have the authority to buy a continent. They didn't even know how big it was, but they knew a bargain when they saw one. For $15 million, about 3 cents an acre, the United States purchased 828,000 square miles. The hidden truth. The checkbook conquest now. Here is the part your history teacher might have skipped. France didn't actually own that land. In 1803, France's control over the Louisiana Territory was purely on paper. They had a few forts and a handful of traders. 99% of that land was owned, governed, and defended by tribes like the Sioux, the Osage, the Caddo, and the Quapo. When Jefferson signed that check, he wasn't buying land. He was buying the right of preemption. This is a fancy legal term that basically means we now have the exclusive right to be the only ones to bully, trick, or force the native people off this land. It was a real estate flip of epic proportions. Napoleon sold something he didn't possess, and the United States bought something the sellers didn't have the right to give away. The crowded wilderness too. The American public. The Louisiana Purchase was painted as the discovery of a new world. But for the people already there, it was an invisible invasion. Imagine you are a member of the Mandan tribe in present-day North Dakota. You have a thriving city center, a complex economy, and international trade alliances. One morning, a group of explorers led by Lewis and Clark shows up. They tell you that a great father in a place called Washington now owns the ground beneath your feet because he gave some gold to a short man in France. It sounds like a joke, right? But it was the beginning of a nightmare. The empty West was actually home to the Spanish Empire, watching nervously from their missions in the Southwest. The British fur giants, operating out of the North. Powerful indigenous confederacies, who viewed both the French and the Americans as nothing more than temporary trading partners. The United States didn't walk into an empty room. They broke into a crowded dinner party and announced they were the new landlords. The spark of the Great Expansion, the Louisiana Purchase, changed the DNA of America. Before 1803, the U.S. was a collection of states. After 1803, it was an empire in waiting. Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark not just to look at birds and plants, but to act as commercial scouts. They were mapping the loot. They were looking for the best river routes, the richest soil, and the most vulnerable tribes. They were the appraisers for a property the U.S. intended to take by any means necessary. This checkbook conquest set a dangerous precedent. It taught the American government that the continent could be carved up in European counting houses without ever consulting the people who actually lived there. It turned the West into a commodity product to be bought, sold, and cleansed. As the ink dried on the treaty, the stage was set. The invisible conquest was over. Now, the era of the wagon, the rifle, and the forced march was about to begin. The illusion of the empty West had served its purpose. It gave the United States the moral cover to start a century of hidden conquests. Howdy folks, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that reshaped the map of North America. A tale of ambition, conflict, and a massive land grab that many historians see as one of the most calculated moves in American history. We're talking about the annexation of Texas and the war that followed, the Mexican-American War. But this isn't just a story about a border dispute. It's about a president with a vision, a manifest destiny that stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and a plan to make it a reality, no matter the cost. So, let's set the stage. The year is 1845. Texas, after winning its independence from Mexico nearly a decade earlier, is finally annexed by the United States. Now, you might think this was the final chapter, but it was just the beginning. The problem was, nobody could agree on where Texas ended and Mexico began. The U.S. claimed the border was the Rio Grande. Deep in territory Mexico considered its own. Mexico, on the other hand, insisted the border was the Nueces River, much further north. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. It was a 150-mile wide strip of disputed land, and it was about to become the flashpoint for a full-blown war. But why was this happening now? To understand that, we need to meet the man in the White House. President James K. Polk. Polk wasn't just any president. He was a man on a mission. He ran on a platform of expansion, promising to bring not only Texas, but also the Oregon Territory into the Union. He was a firm believer in manifest destiny, the popular idea that the United States was divinely ordained to expand across the continent. But Polk's ambition didn't stop at Texas or Oregon. He had his eyes on a much bigger prize. California. California in the 1840s was a sparsely populated, loosely controlled territory of Mexico, but it had something the U.S. desperately wanted: deep water ports on the Pacific Ocean, like San Francisco Bay. Access to the Pacific would open up lucrative trade routes with Asia and cement America's status as a continental power. Polk knew that acquiring California was the key to fulfilling this grand vision. The question was, Toyedi. His first move was to try and buy it. Polk sent a diplomat named John Slado to Mexico City with a pretty audacious offer. The U.S. would pay off Mexico's debt to American citizens, and in exchange for recognizing the Rio Grande as the Texas border, they'd offer up to $30 million for the territories of New Mexico and California. It was a bold move, but it was also deeply insulting to Mexico. The Mexican government, already unstable and reeling from the loss of Texas, refused to even meet with selling off nearly half their country to an aggressive neighbor was political suicide, and they knew it. With diplomacy off the table, Polk shifted to his backup plan, a plan that many believe was his intended strategy all along. He decided to provoke a conflict in early 1846. He ordered General Zachary Taylor and his troops to march south from the Nueces River and set up a fort right on the northern bank of the Rio Grande. Deep inside the disputed territory, imagine a neighbor you have a fence dispute with suddenly building a shed halfway into what you consider your backyard. That's essentially what the U.S. did. It was a deliberate act of provocation, an undeniable challenge to Mexican sovereignty. The Mexican government saw this exactly for what it was. They demanded that Taylor withdraw. Taylor refused. For weeks, the two armies stared each other down across the river. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, on April 25th, 1846, it happened. A Mexican cavalry unit crossed the Rio Grande and ambushed an American patrol, killing or capturing all 70 men. This was the moment Polk had been waiting for. When news of the skirmish reached Washington, D.C., Polk went before Congress with a powerful, if misleading, message. He declared that Mexico had shed American blood upon the American soil. He painted the U.S. as the innocent victim of unprovoked aggression. Of course, he conveniently left out the part where he had sent an army into disputed land to intentionally provoke that aggression. But his speech worked. Congress, swept up in a wave of patriotic fervor, overwhelmingly voted to declare war on Mexico. Not everyone was on board, though. A young congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln repeatedly challenged the president, demanding to know the exact spot where American blood had been shed. Abolitionists in the North saw the war for what it was: a cynical plot to acquire new territory where slavery could expand. The writer Henry David Thoreau famously went to jail for refusing to pay taxes that would support the war, an experience that led him to write his famous essay, Civil Disobedience. They saw the war not as a defense of American honor, but as an immoral land grab. But their voices were drowned out. The war was on. The U.S. military, though smaller, was better equipped, better supplied, and had superior leadership. American forces quickly advanced on multiple fronts. General Taylor pushed south into Mexico, winning a series of key battles. Another force, under General Stephen Kearny, marched west Sicily, capturing Santa Fe, New Mexico, before continuing on to California. In California, a small group of American settlers, with the quiet encouragement of U.S. agents, had already staged their own revolt, the so-called Bear Flag Revolt, declaring California an independent republic. By the time Kearny's troops arrived, the U.S. Navy had already captured the major ports. With very little resistance, California fell under American control. Polk's primary objective was achieved within the first few months of the war. But Mexico refused to surrender. So, Polk authorized a daring plan to end the war once and for all. He sent General Winfield Scott with an army of 12,000 men to land at Veracruz on the Gulf Coast and march 260 miles inland to capture the ultimate prize, Mexico City itself. It was an incredibly risky campaign, reminiscent of Hernan Cortés' conquest of the Aztecs 3 centuries earlier. Scott's army faced tropical diseases, guerrilla attacks, and a determined Mexican army defending its homeland. Yet, after a series of hard-fought battles, including the famous storming of Chapultepec Castle, American troops entered Mexico City in September 1847. The war was effectively over. The peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, was signed in early 1848. It was a complete and total victory for the United States. Mexico was forced to cede a vast expanse of territory, what is now California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. They also had to finally recognize the Rio Grande as the border of Texas. In exchange, the U.S. paid Mexico a paltry $15 million, a fraction of what Polk had originally offered to buy the land for. Overnight, the United States grew by a third, fulfilling the dream of manifest destiny and becoming a true coast-to-coast nation. But this victory came at a tremendous cost. Thousands of American and tens of thousands of Mexican lives were lost. For Mexico, it was a national trauma, a humiliating defeat that resulted in the loss of half its territory. The war also had profound consequences for the United States. The massive new territories acquired from Mexico immediately reignited the explosive debate over slavery. Would these new lands be free or slave? This question would tear the nation apart and, just over a decade later, lead directly to the American Civil War. As one writer put it, the Mexican-American War was the dose of arsenic that eventually killed the Union. So, was the war an unavoidable conflict over a border? Or was it a calculated war of conquest orchestrated by President Polk? To seize California, the evidence strongly suggests the latter. From his expansionist campaign promises to his attempts to buy the territory, and finally, to his deliberate provocation on the Rio Grande, Polk's actions all point to a single-minded goal: acquiring the Pacific coast. He got what he wanted, but in doing so, he set the stage for an even bloodier conflict to come. It is a powerful and often overlooked chapter in American history that shows how ambition and the quest for land can reshape nations and define their futures for generations. What do you think? Was Polk a brilliant strategist or an immoral aggressor? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one. Imagine it is 1865. The American Civil War has just ended. The nation is scarred, bloody, and broken. But while the South is in ruins, the North has emerged as an industrial titan. The leaders in Washington, D.C. look west and realize they have a massive problem. They own the land on the map, but they don't control it. Between the bustling cities of the East and the gold mines of California lies 2,000 miles of the Great American Desert, the Great Plains. To the U.S. government, this was a gap that needed to be closed. To the Sioux, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Kiowa, this was the center of the world. The U.S. didn't send an army first. They sent the Transcontinental Railroad. This wasn't just a transportation project. It was the spine of the empire. It was a 2,000-mile-long dagger aimed at the heart of the indigenous world. The Iron Horse was coming, and it wouldn't just carry passengers, it would carry the end of a way of life. The corporate conquest. Land as currency here is the hidden financial secret of the West. The U.S. government was broke after the Civil War, so they couldn't afford to build the railroad themselves. Instead, they made a deal with two massive corporations, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. On January 24, 1848, a man named James Marshall looked down into the American River in California and saw a glimmer that would change the world. It was gold. Wheaton Montesico was out. It triggered a global fever so intense that ships were abandoned in San Francisco harbor because their crews simply jumped overboard to run for the hills. We are taught to see the gold rush as a story of opportunity, of rags to riches. But for the people who actually lived in California, that glimmer of gold was the beginning of a genocide. This wasn't a rush for wealth, it was a race for survival. In the hidden conquest of the West, gold wasn't just a currency, it was the fuel for an ethnic cleansing that happened so fast it left the rest of the world as head spinning. The Four Niners, an army of occupation. In 1848, California was a diverse territory of roughly 150,000 indigenous people and a smaller population of Spanish-speaking Californios. By 1850, it was flooded with 300,000 49ers from all over the globe. But this wasn't just a migration, it was an occupation. These newcomers didn't care about existing land titles or ancient tribal territories. They saw California as a free-for-all. If a native village was sitting on a potential gold vein, the village was burned. If a Mexican rancher tried to defend his cattle from starving miners, he was lynched. The hidden part of the gold rush is that it turned California into a lawless frontier where the only law was the right of conquest. The U.S. government, still reeling from the Mexican-American War, didn't step in to stop the chaos. They stepped in to codify it. State-sponsored genocide. The scalp bounties. This is the part of the story that rarely makes it into the textbooks. When California became a state in 1850, its first governor, Peter Burnett, stood before the legislature and made a chilling declaration that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. Must be expected. This wasn't just tough talk. The state of California actually subsidized the killing of native people. They passed laws that made it legal to indenture effectively enslaved native children. Even worse, the state government reimbursed volunteer militias for their expenses in hunting down and killing indigenous people. Between 1850 and 1860, the state of California paid out over $1 million of fortune at the time to these private death squads. They were paid by the scalp. The hidden conquest wasn't just about soldiers in blue uniforms. It was about ordinary miners and settlers being paid by the government to commit mass murder in the name of progress. In just 20 years, the native population of California was reduced by 80%. It remains one of the fastest and most complete population collapses in human history. Hydraulic mining. The scars on the earth. The conquest wasn't just against people. It was against the land itself. Once the easy surfaced gold was gone, the hidden conquest turned industrial. Enter hydraulic mining. Imagine massive iron cannons, called monitors, shooting jets of water with enough pressure to strip the skin off a man. Miners used these to literally wash away entire mountainsides to get at the gold buried deep within the gravel. This wasn't mining, it was environmental warfare. The consequences were catastrophic. Clogged rivers, The debris, silt, and mud flowed into the Central Valley, raising riverbeds and causing massive, permanent flooding. Toxic legacy. To separate the gold from the dirt, miners used millions of pounds of mercury. That mercury leaked into the water, poisoning the fish in the soil. A toxic legacy that still affects California's ecosystem over 170 years later. The death of forests. Thousands of acres of ancient redwoods were clear-cut just to build the flumes and sluices needed for the mines. The Golden State was built by destroying the very environment that made it beautiful. The wealth of San Francisco's banks was literally washed out of the mountains at the cost of the state's future. The racial hierarchy. The foreign miners' tax. The gold rush is often called a melting pot, but the reality was a strict racial hierarchy. When Chinese, Chilean, and Mexican miners proved to be more skilled and hardworking than the Americans, the hidden conquest turned to legal discrimination. The California legislature passed the foreign miners' tax, specifically designed to drive non-white miners out of the gold fields. It was an extortion racket backed by the law. If you weren't white, you had to pay a monthly fee that was often higher than what you could actually earn. This led to the creation of segregated Chinatowns and the forced displacement of thousands of skilled workers who had every right to be there. The price of progress. By the 1860s, the gold rush was over. The lone prospector had been replaced by massive corporations with deep pockets and heavy machinery. The hidden conquest of California had successfully transformed a diverse indigenous landscape into a corporate industrial powerhouse. California became the engine of the American economy, providing the gold that funded the Union during the Civil War and built the railroads, discussed in Section 3. But the cost was an apocalypse for the original inhabitants and the environment. The American dream of the gold rush was built on a foundation of state-sanctioned nightmare. As the gold moved east to fill the vaults of New York and D.C., California stood as a grim reminder of what manifest destiny actually looked like when the masks were off. It looked like greed, it looked like smoke, and it looked like blood. In 1893, a young historian named Frederick Jackson Turner stood before a crowd in Chicago and delivered a chilling thesis. The American frontier is gone. He argued that the Great Open West was what made Americans who they were: tough, individualistic, and democratic. But he left out a terrifying question. What happens to a nation built on conquest when there is nothing left to conquer? If you think the story of American expansion ended at the Pacific Ocean, you've been looking at the wrong map. The hidden conquest didn't stop. It just changed its target. The lessons learned in the forests of Ohio, the deserts of Mexico, and the plains of Dakota became the manual for how the United States would interact with the rest of the world for the next century. The blueprint for global power. By the 1890s, the US had perfected a system of expansion. They had learned how to use corporate interests to lead the way: the railroads, how to use manufactured border incidents to justify war, the Mexico-American War, and how to use legal frameworks to absorb new territories while disenfranchising the people living there. Look at the Spanish-American War of 1898. It is almost a carbon copy of the war with Mexico. A mysterious explosion on the USS Maine in Havana Harbor served as the American blood on American soil moment. Suddenly, the US wasn't just a continental power. It was snatching up the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. The manifest destiny that had driven wagons across the Rockies was now driving steamships across the Pacific. The West wasn't a destination. It was a rehearsal. The paper conquest. The legal shadow, the most hidden legacy of the Westward Expansion, is UNET, found in a museum. It's found in the US Supreme Court. Many of the laws used today to manage federal lands, mineral rights, and indigenous sovereignty were written during the heat of the 19th century land grabs. Take the doctrine of discovery. This was a legal concept the Supreme Court used in 1823 to argue that indigenous people didn't actually own their land, they only occupied it, like tenants in a house. This legal trickery is still the foundation of federal Indian law today. When you see modern battles over oil pipelines or mining rights on tribal lands, you are watching the 21st century version of the same hidden conquest that began with the Louisiana Purchase. The ink on those old treaties may be faded, but the legal chains they created are still very much in place. The cultural echo. The Western brand. Why do we love Westerns? Why is the cowboy the ultimate symbol of America? The hidden conquest was so successful because it managed to rebrand a brutal imperial expansion as a romantic adventure. Hollywood spent the 20th century painting over the blood and the broken treaties with the image of John Wayne and the heroic pioneer. This cultural legacy is powerful. It created a national identity based on the idea of the relentless move forward. It's why American culture is so focused on the next big thing. Whether that's the space race, the final frontier, or the digital revolution of Silicon Valley, we are a nation that feels it must expand to survive. But this frontier logic often ignores the cost of that expansion, the people left behind, and the resources drained to fuel the progress. The map of inequality. If you look at a modern map of the United States, you can still see the scars of the 1800s. The straight-line states, those perfectly square borders in the West, they were drawn by bureaucrats in D.C. who never set foot on the land, ignoring natural watersheds and tribal boundaries. The reservation system, these pockets of land remain some of the most economically challenged areas in the country, a direct result of being pushed onto the leftover land the government didn't want in the 1880s. Public land battles. Over 47% of the land in the western U.S. is still owned by the federal government. This is a direct hangover from the era when the government claimed everything but had you and yet sold it off to corporations or homesteaders. Conclusion. The empire in the mirror. So, what is the hidden conquest really about? It is about the fact that the United States didn't just grow. It was built. It was built through a series of choices. The choice to buy land that was for sale, the choice to provoke wars for territory, and the choice to prioritize an iron horse over a living culture. Understanding westward expansion as a conquest rather than just expansion changes how we see the world. It reminds us that every mile of the highway we drive on, every skyscraper in Los Angeles, and every farm in Kansas has a deep, complex, and often painful history beneath it. America is a continental empire. Its wealth, its power, and its identity are the fruits of the most successful land grab in human history. We can celebrate the grit and the courage of those who moved west, but we must also have the courage to look at the hidden side of that story, because only by understanding the true cost of our past can we hope to build a more honest future.